Dubstep is a form of electronic dance music that first took shape in South London during the late 90s and early noughties, drawing from rich traditions of UK garage, drum and bass, and Jamaican dub sound system culture. It's instantly recognisable for its deep, wobbling bass lines, syncopated rhythms, and dramatic drops that captivate listeners and energise dance floors worldwide. Over the past 2 decades, artists like Skrillex, Excision, Zed's Dead, and Subtronics have propelled dubstep into the mainstream, making it a staple at global music festivals and a frequent feature in gaming and film soundtracks. This is Start Here, the podcast from the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music with me, Alexis Ffrench, and this is all about getting under the skin of a genre. I'm a pianist, composer and producer in a genre I call classical soul. I live in that world, but what about the worlds of heavy metal, experimental, Latin? I'm excited to get into all of these genres on this series of Start Here. So let's turn our attention back to dubstep. And our guest this week, dubstep aficionado and journalist, Joe Muggs. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm all right, yeah. I'm very excited to be here and surrounded by speakers as well.
All of these keyboards and paraphernalia, but it's very exciting. Really looking forward to getting stuck into this. Now, you've written hundreds of column inches for specialist music mags like Mix Mag and all the broadsheets and the definitive book on the subject, I have to say, Bass, Mids and Tops, which I've hugely enjoyed reading. But can you give us your elevator pitch for why people should be listening to dubstep?
Okay, it's kind of threefold, the reasons for loving dubstep. The first is it provides a brilliant example of how cultural flows that are manifold, that bring together loads of different cultures that come from loads of different times, periods, areas, high and low, can all be filtered into one specific sound at a specific time. And second to that, closely related to that, it's about how a very small group of people can create a scene. Even in the modern information age, they can create something that is just for them, like for a group of friends, and actually change the world. And third, and maybe most importantly, there's very few genres that hit you so hard on the dance floor, take you over, make you lose yourself for hours on end. Often, you don't even need intoxicants. It is an intoxicant in itself. It is some of the most raw power music that there is.
Yeah, amazing. Now, we'll get into why that is and why it has that particular effect on people. And I've certainly experienced that, listening as I have to so many of the wonderful samples and playlists that you forwarded. What would you say is unique about dubstep, if we could just position it on itself for a while?
The thing that people most notice about classic dubstep is it's half the tempo of classic rave music.
Right.
Not all dubstep is. It gets complicated. There's many, many hybrids and variations of it. But the absolute classic sound, which broke out into the world around 2006, having kind of gestated for a few years before that, is it's half the tempo of, say, techno or UK garage, both of which heavily influenced it. And rather than being fast percussion that moves you, it's giant bass tones that I always think of it as pulling you, whereas, classic high tempo dance music pushes you when you're dancing. Dubstep kind of pulls you around like you're trapped in waves of sound.
When you say giant bass tones, are these sort of staccato, repeated notes, or are they short? Are they sustained, deep,
flowing?
Right.
It's the modulation, the wobble, as people often call it.
Okay.
Which quite often it'll be a single note, and it is that modulation of the sort of resonance at the high end of the bass goes wah 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 wah.
Let's try and situate that, because I have this rather handsome Moog next to me on my left. I'm going to turn here. I'm doing my talking now, and I'm going to play a note, and I'll try to do some oscillation so we can just have just an idea of what that modulation sounds like. We're getting some dark territory there, aren't we? It's timbrally and texturally.
Absolutely.
But it's those kind of bass tones that is that the sort of thing that pulled you into the genre initially? Was it the sonic properties of the music, or was it the musical properties?
It's the sonic properties, because the early breakthrough dubstep was very, very stripped down, very basic. A lot of it was produced by young producers with very little musical education, kind of based on what they were hearing from their older brothers, drum and bass and garage and similar records.
Yeah.
Trying to replicate the ones that they liked most, which were already the most stripped down versions of those things.
Yeah.
And kind of instinctively working out synthesis on particularly the software was what was then called Fruity Loops. It's now FL Studio. It's now kind of 16 generations down the line, and it's a complex bit of software.
Yeah.
Early on, it was very simple. It was just set out looking like a drum machine on your screen, and you had to program notes by switching them on and off.
And the synthesis, the combining of these different waves to produce unique...
It had its own built-in synth, which could produce bleeps. It could produce very simple kind of modulation sweeps on different tones.
Yeah.
Just through basic subtractive synthesis, as they call it, which, old-fashioned synth like the Moog uses, they found themselves able to make these wobbly sounds and these great big sub-bass sounds.
Yeah.
Just with a home computer, just with a Pentium PC or whatever.
Amazing. Now, we've covered in the series, we've covered a few genres, drum and bass and grime. Where does dubstep sit in the canon, so to speak? Could you position it or situate it in terms of contextually?
It's a half-sibling to grime.
Half-sibling, right.
I would say. So both emerged at around the turn of the millennium from the UK garage scene. UK garage, in turn, had been a kind of hybrid of house with the sonics of drum and bass and sound system, Caribbean-influenced sound system music, heavy bass within a house, kind of funky house framework for a very multicultural audience. A younger generation still they liked the stuff that had the heavy bass and more space in it, either because it was just more raw rave music than the kind of very musical UK garage, or because they were MCs and they wanted the space for their voices to take precedence, which is obviously where grime began to emerge. Dubstep, some dubstep producers, there were crossover producers, certain producers did both dubstep and grime, but dubstep very specifically in Croydon, the South London suburbs. Okay. Croydon is the home of dubstep. Wow. It is literally as specific as that. It happened in Croydon. There was one record shop called Big Apple Records, and there were people there who had a long history in rave music, artwork. Arthur Smith, who had produced lots of rave techno classics. He'd produced Daniel Bedingfield and stuff. He was working there, was part of the Big Apple label that they founded. And it became a centre for selling UK garage. Lots of people congregated there. One of the guys working there, DJ Hatcher, became known for playing the toughest, rawest instrumentals from UK garage records. Right. He is believed to have coined the name dubstep for
Hatcher did it.
His sound.
Yeah.
And I think they put it as a label on one of the shelves in the shop. So dub didn't originally refer to dub reggae at that time, although there was an enduring dub reggae influence through jungle and drum and bass and all the things that led to this. But it referred to the dub, as in the B-side of a house or garage record.
Got it.
The instrumental B-side was called the dub.
The dub, yeah.
And so he was playing the dubs of garage tunes. Because he was playing like this, the youngsters who came into the shop were trying to imitate his sound, and as so often happens, they got more and more extreme with the direction that he was going in. So he then started playing their records, and eventually, around 2004 or so, so it was identified. It was identified as future garage. It was identified as new bass, as break step, as all these various different kind of subgenres. People got it mixed up with grime. Some of it was overlapping with grime. Some grime MCs used to go rap over the Croydon guys' tunes. Yeah. But around 2004, in fact, the confusion really got going in 2004 because the Aphex Twins Reflex record label put out a compilation, which was actually all Croydon dubstep producers, but they called it grime. They called the compilation grime, just to mess everything up. Anyway, in particular, Digital Mystics came along, two producers, Mala and Koki. Mala had been a very... had tried to have a pop career as a UK garage MC, had got disenchanted with the music industry, gone back to his bedroom and studied this music and really gone in deep on it. They created this kind of half-tempo sound. They were the ones who really flipped it into this, like, putting the snare drum on the third beat of the bar rather than the 2 and the 4, as it were. And suddenly created this like booming, cavernous sound. And all the other youngsters around them started kind of going, all right, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Dubstep emerges.
Yeah. So let's talk about wider dubstep's impact on the wider landscape, wider cultural landscape. You've mentioned games and how it featured in games and was fairly widespread there. How else did it inform, so we say, popular culture? And could you give us some insights there?
So, yes, 2006 was a breakout year. It was it was fascinating to witness that previously dubstep had been almost a curiosity. Grime had already kind of broken big. It was, it's there in the style press. Newspapers were writing articles about it. It was, you could hear it out of every car in London practically in the early 2000s. And dubstep was its kind of curious, I don't know, more insular cousin down in Croydon.
Yeah.
And it caught on a little bit in Bristol.
Okay.
Very, very small scene for those initial, I think the term was invented in 2003. So it was put in print in 2003.
Right.
Early part of the 2000s. Tiny insular scene. 2006, Marianne Hobbs broadcast a special program on Six Music, or was it Radio 1? I forget. But Marianne Hobbs broadcast a special show, Dubstep Wars, showcasing Croydon and Bristol talent. The same year, the DMZ rave in Brixton, which was originally in the basement of Mass, in the third note, I think it's called, small cellar of Mass, blew up so big that they had people queuing like 3 times around the block. They had to move up into Mass, which is a much bigger venue in Brixton. So this was a symbolic moment. And the few fans that there'd been, there were little offshoots around the world. People in Belgium was big. Czech Republic was big for some reason. Denver, odd little places.
Little pockets.
Really, their scene started exploding. It really caught on. 2007, it exploded worldwide. By that time, all the new rave bands, all the indie bands were starting to get dubstep remixes. Drum and bass raves would have a dubstep room in the second room. And then in 2007, sometimes the dubstep moved to the main room and the drum and bass to the side room. This duo, Caspa and Rusko. Rusko was from Leeds, which was another of the early adopting places. They did a particularly rowdy version of dubstep with more kind of high-end frequencies, more filling the sort of immediate attention and less reliant on just the bass.
Yeah.
So therefore something that kids could instantly grasp, could blast out of their phone and stuff. They did a mix for Fabric, the legendary club in London. And this was very last minute as well. They were filling in for someone else who they'd had legal problems. And Caspa and Rusko were like, yeah, we can fill in. We could just come in. They did the mix live in the club. It was released. It was the biggest selling ever Fabric mix. And it just blew up this rowdy sound of dubstep with Americans. And particularly, not necessarily with Americans who'd been into rave music before, but with kids who'd been into heavy metal before, because they liked the noisiness of it.
Yeah.
And this created a global scene. From 2007, people like Rihanna were asking Croydon dubstep kids to come and produce for her. Britney released her Blackout album, which was dubstep influenced. You could hear the synths on it. It just completely like went wham into global pop culture from just a couple of years before being this tiny.
And who were the producers
scene
at that time who were really hotly in demand?
So Skream and Benga were the duo and still are. They've come back together after this long and amazing rock and roll roller coaster that they've been through. They were the ones who were two of the youngest on the scene. They both started producing when they were 13.
Right.
I think their first tunes released were about that age, and they were both like just archetypal cheeky chappies. Both had older brothers in the drum and bass scene, interestingly. So it's like this is their second generation ravers. Yeah. They were always like destined to be big. So they became like the real figureheads of the scene. Caspa and Rusko became the figureheads for kind of breaking out to America. You had, I remember doing a dubstep, a Mixmag cover in 2010 when it had really gone stratospheric. Yeah. And it was those four, and Joker, who was a Bristolian, who actually started in grime, but like really cottoned on to the high production values that dubstep was creating. A lot of the grime guys used to kind of go, how come these dubstep kids have overtaken us? And it was partly to do with the fact that they got very serious about their production values. Yeah. And really understood how to use these big speakers, how to reach big arenas. Yeah. And so therefore when they broke into America, it worked as an arena sound, which was weird for the people who wanted it just to be like an offspring of reggae sound system music.
You've touched on the adjacency of heavy metal. Can you talk us through that a little bit? Because I find that fascinating in terms of that genre, movement between genres and should we say, not similarities, but commonalities in terms of DNA?
Yes. There's this sense of the physical surge. So something that comes with that half tempo thing in dubstep, it's just very natural to headbang to. Yeah. I mean, in the early days when and still in deep dubstep raves, as they would call it, or where it's still reliant on the 140, a lot of it was about people just kind of standing and nodding. Yeah. And so when it created these rowdier versions, it was natural for people to kind of surge around, mosh pits would form. What people would do with the mid-range frequencies is the wobble, the modulation on the tones would get faster and more manic, so the tones would go wah, 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 wah,
got it.
Wah, wah, wah,
yeah.
Which becomes kind of like a fast thrash riff. All of the techno and drum and bass influenced percussion, started piling back on. Yeah. So you would get, as so often happens in classic thrash metal, the contrast between the slow lurching bit and then the sudden manic area, and you get the tension and the drop. And you'll see, if you ever see videos of American dubstep raves to this day, they have they'll have a wait for the drop moment, and then all these guys will surge towards the fence and like rattle the fence and bang their heads over the fence, or they'll have a circle mosh in the middle of the dance floor. So it speaks, and I mean, God, there was a lot of complaint about machismo in the scene and this kind of speaking to adolescent teenage boy need for release and all that sort of thing, which it did. And there was a lot of Caspa and Rusko school of dubstep that formed, like, names came in, like they were called things like Trolley Snatcher and Funt Case, and songs would be called things like songs would be called things like Custard Chucker and like puerile kind of. They called it bro step. In fact, bro step is their name of the
was fascinating.
subgenre.
Okay,
right?
and that's the machismo kind of
for the American bro,
Got it.
And so it reached that similar kind of thing to nu metal and Limp Bizkit and that kind of thing. Often there were hip hop samples in it, so it came very close to nu metal. In fact, I can't remember which DJ it was, but someone once said to me they thought that one of the reasons for this was the coming in of the smoking ban in British clubs, because up until this breakthrough point of the late 2000s, dubstep had been more or less, and this is part of its charm and part of what made it such a kind of local South London-y sort of thing. It was about a can of Red Stripe and a spliff. They were the drugs of choice for the dubstep raves, and this speaks to the power of the music, that people would still rave till 6 a.m. with a can of Red Stripe and a spliff. They didn't need that. People obviously were taking stimulants, the young people will, but those early days, that's very much what it was. But of course, you could smoke on the dance floor. So much like a classic reggae dance, people would just smoke and nod and soak up the bass and, meditate on the bass weight, as the slogan of the DMZ.
This is before the ban had come in.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Whereas when the ban came in, people obviously go out, they go in and out, their attention span goes down because they're going in and out. But also, it was said that this kind of brought in more stimulants. People were doing more ecstasy and cocaine, and therefore the energy levels of the music kind of kept up to keep up with them and their lower attention span and their greater need for
so the music actually
stimulation.
changed as a result of the...
So yes, I mean, the deep stuff always stayed, and this is something people have, there has been this sense that the more manic bro-step version destroyed older dubstep, but actually a lot of some of the originals kind of verged out into what they called post-dubstep, which was slightly different tempo, brought in more influences from garage and techno and other scenes. But if you take Mala from Digital Mystics, for example, who's like this...
I was listening to this on your playlist, which you kindly sent me,
Yeah, he's one of the foundational producers, and him and people that he worked with, people on his label, still managed to play to huge crowds, thousands across the world from then until now, without having to play to the lowest common denominator, most noisy, most manic, kind of bro-friendly sound. And Mala, in fact, would go on to do these amazing fusions of his deep, heavyweight British sound system type dubstep with Cuban musicians, with Peruvian musicians, with soul singers, very, really, really kind of developed and evolved versions of his sound, but still true to what he'd kind of originally done in the mid-2000s.
Yeah. But in terms of what this is all doing, I was reading, I think, in some of your notes about the effects of the modulation these deep bass tones have on people's physiology and etc. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Because I think this is a fascinating aspect of this music.
Well, I mean, the key quote, and this was the first time I'd ever been to a DMZ rave in 2006, right at this breakthrough time, a very exciting moment for dubstep. And Loafer, who along with Mala and Koki put on the DMZ raves, excitably was telling me about why it's so powerful. And he said to me that bass simultaneously reminds you of the mother's heartbeat in the womb, where all you can hear is low frequencies because you're submerged, and therefore gives you a feeling of great comfort. But at the same time, the physical power of it sets off your fight or flight reflexes. It sets off adrenaline around your body. So you're energized and ready for action, but at the same time, you're embraced and held safe.
Cocooned, yes.
And somewhere in between this is this quite magical space. And I think it's absolutely true. I mean, people have known this within reggae and people used to congregate at Jar Shaka dances to dance all night for exactly the same reasons. And this is just a new way of demonstrating that or providing that opportunity to people. So a bit later, I spoke to, a number of researchers to try and get to the bottom of this. And this was about 10 years ago. Not much research had been done on bass, because it is actually quite difficult to measure people's responses. Well, there's a vast speaker next to them.
The science of bass.
Yeah,
Or the neuroscience of bass.
The neuroscience of bass is developing fast, and it's really interesting how much of this stuff is now getting properly, understood and codified. But it's so different to almost any other kind of music. I mean, we think of music as in the ears and the hearing circuits of the brain, but in fact, bass. We have 100 senses or something. We don't have 5 senses. There are so many different versions of touch. I forget the name, proprioception and interoception and all these various different things. Like you have an entire different set of nerves and set of sections of the brain for gentle touch, for gentle moving touch, for sharp pain, for impact pain, for the movement of your body. And bass pretty much triggers them all. So it lights up the whole brain.
So how did dubstep come into your life?
I was perfectly situated for rave to hit in my teens. So yes. I didn't quite get the first wave of acid house. I was 14. You would see your friends' older brothers going off and have these crazy adventures, coming back on a Monday with a glint in their eye.
Yeah.
But I was 16 in 1990, which is when the Orb arrived. It was when Primal Skream started getting remixed. It was when the first bleep and bass records, they were called, from Yorkshire. So LFO, Nightmares on Wax, the early Warp Records things. And these were records that brought together American techno, northern industrial sounds, and reggae sound system bass. I started going out raving, and I followed all of these shifts as hardcore came in, so the breakbeats from hip-hop, the jungle turned it into something more heavily reggae and dancehall influenced, and again, the deep bass carrying it all through. I had friends who were in techno. I just followed everything all the way through the 90s. But of course it splintered, and it was, manifold developments of more or less experimental or populist dance music all the way through that decade. When dubstep arrived, I'd been craving something that brought it all back together, and this was it. It held exactly the same spot as those Sheffield and Leeds bleep records in 1990 had for me, that they had utter simplicity but extreme experimentalism, something kind of fascinating and interesting in the cultural intersection to, fill your brain, but the bass that just overwhelmingly made it physical and emotional. So it was a coming together of all the things that I'd loved at 16, and here it was again. So it just revivified my interest, and then my writing career was taking off at that point. So it just so happened that I got to be one of the people who documented its explosion out into the world.
Incredible. And when it emerged into mainstream, did your relationship with the genre change at all? And if so, how?
For dubstep in general, there was definitely a point when it was like, we're going to have a dubstep supergroup. There was a lot of mismanagement by the majors. It was a hedonistic scene. A lot of these kids were going crazy. They were getting crazy money for DJing all around the world. So they had insane schedules, and they were partying. And, it's very difficult to manage. It was a fast-moving scene, as we said from the beginning, because it was like about competing and having the new thing and so on. So the slow-moving majors never quite managed to get their machines moving at the right speed to capture it.
Didn't have the same agility as the genre itself.
Yeah. There was True Tiger did a couple of amazing remixes of they were remixing like X Factor contestants. They did a track with the grime MC P Money, Slang Like This, which was just like one of the most beautiful grime dubstep crossover records. It was about British slang. It was about cross-culturalism. It was aggressive. It was swaggering. It was funny. It was such a great record. I thought that was going to be emblematic of a new kind of burst out of this multicultural British music. Rebecca Ferguson from the X Factor had an amazing dubstep remix. I can't remember who
she
did it right
really?
now, but phenomenal, because she's a classic soul belter, the sort of singer that you would expect on a rave record, and it just worked so perfectly. I went to Rinse FM, which was a very key organisation to the breakout of dubstep. They were originally a pirate radio station founded in the days of Jungle in 1994 by teenagers. It had been the first place that grime first happened, really. The MCs crowding into the studio. And it became the home of dubstep in the breakout period. They became a kind of legit station, which they are now. They got community licenses and all this sort of thing. And they were throwing bigger and bigger parties. And I remember in 2010, they threw a couple in Matter, which was the short-lived club that Fabric founded on the side of the Millennium Dome. And this is so dubstep was the headline genre. They had every genre, though. It really felt there was this sound called UK Funky, which was kind of grime meets house at the time. Yeah. There was experimental electronics at the time, a lot of stuff coming from Glasgow. There was road rap. You had Giggs was just becoming a star then. It's very like British gangster rap sound. All of this was in the mix in this thing. And then dubstep was the thing that had pulled it all together. It had pulled very specifically black London sounds like grime and like UK Funky towards the rave scene, the more kind of white or multicultural rave scene, towards the kind of more soulful scenes. They all came together with dubstep at the centre. And there was this period in 2010 specifically where it felt like it had drawn everything together, and it was on the verge of something bigger still. And that kind of dissipated. And that's partly because of the huge American success, which in the couple of years following went even more insane. With
success of people like
of dubstep, so Skream and Benga particularly, Joker, pretty much all of the original DJs, if they had those who wanted to, were able to go and play to tens of thousands of people in American arenas, and you had Skrillex come along and make the sound globally huge, with an even more exaggerated. He was a former emo singer, so he was bringing actual metal emo kind of musicality into it. And I think it was probably the global success more than anything that stopped it being as great a seismic shift in Britain as it could have been.
That's interesting. So it's stifled in a way the creativity in Britain, or it stifled the evolution. Or?
Yeah, I think it stifled the evolution. It stifled the core socialness of the scene itself, because people were flying off all around the world, because obviously
to try and get a piece of that.
And obviously egos and drugs and everything else, got in the way. I fear it's kind of a tragedy. I mean, loads of people have come through it. It's had enormous impact. It's been a vastly important thing. But you do sometimes wonder what could have been.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Now, we've covered so much ground, and I feel we could go on for much longer as well. But for those who've listened to this and feel that we've sufficiently wet their whistle to delve in and listen to, at least have a cursory exploration into dubstep music, where should they start their journey? So they've just listened and are just about to start listening to maybe 3 or 4 dubstep producers, artists. Could you give us just a few to start with, please?
Yeah, I would always say go for Mala, M-A-L-A, Mala. Uh-huh. That's where you have to have your big speakers. That's where you have to have the bass. That's where you will really understand the kind of deep flow of Caribbean influence that has run through rave all the way into dubstep. And if you listen to a variety of his records, you'll see what a flexible template what the Croydon kids created in the 2000s is, because he did this beautiful flip of Alicia Keys that was just released as a bootleg called Alicia, and you could hear how he uses these beautiful jazzy Fender Rhodes and a little snippet of soulful vocal, and it's emotional, it's sexy, but it's also like huge rave shaking tune. But at the same time, if you listen to the Mala in Cuba album, he's working with live musicians with, he's not a trained musician, as he always says in interviews, but somehow he has an amazing ear for what musicians are doing and what simple things he can do with his programming and the bass to match those. So if you just search through Mala's career, you'll just hear so much.
I love the sound of that Mala and Cuban music. What's that album called again?
It's called Mala in Cuba. It was facilitated by Giles Peterson, and he did another one in Peru as well, where he works with a lot of indigenous kind of musicians with the flutes and the
gorgeous
percussion as well.
Gorgeous.
To hear where dubstep has come, how far dubstep has come via the American style, I recommend one that my son is into. This is like hyper-modern dubstep. If you look up an artist called Neddy spelt with an I-E at the end, N-E-D-D-I-E, that is someone who has clearly grown up listening to the dubstep, where it overlaps with emo, where it overlaps with all sorts of different experimental electronic things. What I learned from my son is that the kids are as competitive as ever, but now with much more processing power available on their home computers. So they're doing these incredible things with spectral synthesis, with being able to like really understand every frequency across the entire range and make rich, thick layers of sounds.
That's really interesting. Just a question. We've had Mala, we've had Neddy.
Who is good to fill in the gap? Do you know what? I would say, and I keep mentioning them, but I think because they are at the heart of everything, if you go through the work of Skream and Benga, especially in that breakout period from, say, 2005 to 2011, that's where you just hear the vivaciousness and the inventiveness and the variety of the scene, the youthful energy that was going into it, the sense of possibility, the fact that they were experimenting with everything, that they would jump from working with grime MCs to remixing the klaxons to, I think if you play Katie on a Mission, it's something that's so familiar to almost everyone because it's always on pop radio. But whack it up loud and just appreciate the structure and the way that those sliding bass tones are kind of doing this push-pull thing with the percussion. And even better, watch the video, which in fact is filmed at the exact Rinse rave at Matter that I mentioned.
Amazing.
And you could see the audience surging to it, and you can see you see Katie, Skream and Benga and most of the big players in dubstep and grime do cameos in the video, and you can see them sitting in their BMWs or just sitting backstage or being in the middle of the crowd or something. You really get a sense of the energy. But also just, if you listen to that song afresh, it's such a perfect encapsulation of what dubstep was and could do. And then you go back to some of Benga's instrumentals, Skream's instrumentals around the same time, and you'll really get a sense of the mechanics of the sound.
Yeah, love that. Joe Muggs, thank you so very much. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you for listening to Start Here, which is brought to you by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. If you liked today's episode, why not go back and check out the other two series of Start Here? And if you like dubstep, you might enjoy our episodes on grime, drum and bass, and UK garage. Or just sit back and enjoy our musical theatre episode with singer and actor Sinead Holmes for something completely different. Follow ABRSM on TikTok and Instagram and tell us what genre of music you want to be unpacked next.